Hey there. If you're somebody that experiences or suffers from unwanted drinking, and by that I mean you'd like to have one drink during the week, but you find yourself having a whole bottle of wine, or you'd like to have two or three or four on a social occasion, but you find yourself having six or seven, the most important principle that you need to understand and harness is that this drinking is happening in response to emotional discomfort. And when I talk about emotional discomfort, here's some examples of what I'm referring to. The first is desire. And maybe you say, it's not emotional discomfort, I just really like it. But if you imagine having desire for something and depriving yourself of it, of that desire going unfulfilled, that is uncomfortable, and it is a type of emotional discomfort. But what I find is really much more common and more relevant in most people's lives, people I work with, are emotions like boredom, stress, and its variations, anxiety, for example, and maybe regret, guilt, shame, some of those. And maybe you say, I know that stress is a trigger for my drinking. Tell me something that's going to help me out. And what I have to tell you then is that emotion happens in the body. We think thoughts that affect our physiology. Our brain reacts to those thoughts in a way to do things to our physiology that results in sensations in our body. And it's really a reaction to those sensations is what's creating this drive to drink. And so what I admonish my clients to do, and I have many resources that talk about how to do this, is to tune into the physicality of your emotional experience. We all want to stay up in our heads with all this stuff. I'm 57 and I've spent 50 years, over 40 in my head, intellectualizing things. And when we do that, we continue to kind of be out of control. And the more we can tune in, I'll say it again, tune into the physicality of the emotional experience, that's where we can get some power. So what I'm going to do in the rest of this video is go a little bit into the neuroscience behind this, give you an idea of kind of what's going on at a detailed level. You can understand what it is you're trying to pay attention to and why it matters and so on. So here again we have the culprit thoughts. And we think thoughts. These thoughts might be about the wrong that was done to us by our mean boss today at work, or about the wrong that we did to the world today, about the screw up that we did yesterday at work, or we think about the future. We worry about our retirement, whether we're going to make our business successful, whether we're going to get a raise. We've got all these thoughts about the past, the present, and the future. And other parts of our brain are basically doing a threat analysis on those thoughts. And they're really based on, this is the input to this threat analysis engine, and it's saying, what's going on is, am I physically safe? Am I safe in a material sense? Kind of at a very basic fundamental level, it's, am I going to get dinner tonight, and am I going to have a warm place to sleep? But in our modern world, mostly we don't have to worry about that, so we're thinking about money, which just kind of becomes the proxy for all material security. And what's going on with my social security? So when we have thoughts about having been mistreated, or about having screwed something up at work, or we worry about if we're going to perform properly at a work assignment next week, those all reflect threats to our social security. So what happens in response to this subconscious or unconscious threat analysis is physiological adjustments. Our brain says, there's a threat here. Let's make sure that that old Greg is prepared to deal with this threat. And so changes happen to our heartbeat, our blood pressure, our breathing rate and depth of it, our digestion. Maybe it deprioritizes digestion, muscle tension, all sorts of changes to our blood chemistry and our body chemistry, release of hormones like adrenaline and cortisol. All these kind of physiological changes happen in response to this unconscious threat analysis. And again, the input to this is our thoughts. There's other parts of our brain also happening or functioning at an unconscious level that are monitoring these changes to our physiology. This process could be generally called interoception. And they're noticing, Greg's a little jacked up here. What's going on? And it's actually in this part of the brain that does this internal monitoring where emotion processing takes place. This is the part of the brain that takes as its input this physiological situation. Maybe there's a line from our thoughts here and says, oh man, regret, guilt, whatever. And finally, this part of the brain also is responsible for motivation. This part of our brain wants to do something, if it can, take action to bring these physiological processes back into balance. And so one of the outputs of this interoception process in the brain is take action. And what we're talking about is take the action of drinking, because it actually has the effect of settling a lot of this physiology or dampening the perception of it one way or the other. So this is kind of what's going on in us, the human animal. And so what do we do with this information? So I'm going to talk about the self here. Is the self part of the brain? I don't know. It's a subject for philosophers. But when I talk about self, firstly, it's the part of you that wants to drink less, that can think about your future, for example, and realize that on balance you'll be better off if you had one drink on Tuesday instead of a bottle of wine on Tuesday. This self also has the possibility to kind of take a step back and put itself in sort of a witness mode where you can watch yourself think, and you can watch yourself experience emotions, and you can pay attention to your body and notice sensations that were there but that you weren't paying attention to. So the self is kind of the thing that directs the spotlight of attention, and it's the thing that wants what's best for you in the long run. So what happens in the normal course of affairs or business is the self says, man, I want to drink less. And it tries to put the clamp down here on drinking. And I think you can think of that as the expression of willpower. Let me stop this action. But as you've experienced, that doesn't work very well. It's not very effective. It's not very satisfying for sure. It's not reliable. So what can you do instead? So when I talk about paying attention to the physicality of your emotional experience, what I mean is to tune your attention right here on this and observe directly what's going on in your brain. Now, you can't see the changes in chemistry. You don't necessarily, you could look at your garment, I guess, and look at your heart rate. But I'm not talking about that, but you can notice that, what's going on is I got a pit in my belly, or I feel this tightness across my chest, or my shoulders all up around my ears and my jaw is tense. You can pay attention to those sensations. And when you realize that really, that's what you're trying to solve when you drink, is to make those sensations go away, then you can say, well, maybe I can endure this. Maybe this is not so bad. So when you try to handle it down here, your brain has created this emergency. Houston, we have a problem. And you're trying to do something about that, and you're trying to go against your basic nature. But when you can intercept the raw signal, and you can say, this is not such a big deal. I can handle this. You can start to get some leverage and some power over this. There's another thing that the self can do that I want to bring in here. This is kind of like advanced class, but I just want to mention it. And we can kind of interject what I call a validity check on these thoughts. You can watch yourself think. You can observe yourself having some thoughts, and you can try to change your thinking. And sometimes that's successful. But in a lot of cases, these thoughts are very habitual, very routine. We're used to thinking these thoughts about, very often, of how terrible or how useless we are, or we may have a pattern of thinking thoughts about how victimized we've been. And And normally our thoughts aren't so, we believe our thoughts. We invest belief, we entertain them, and they fall straight away into this threat analysis system. But when you can observe these thoughts, you may not be able to control the thoughts that happen in your brain, but you can do this validity check. And so now I still think a lot of crappy, unhelpful thoughts, judgmental thoughts about myself, about other people, thoughts of worry and concern. And because I've practiced this, I've kind of identified a whole pattern of thoughts like, that's just not effective, that's not useful, it's not even true, it's kind of nonsensical. And when you start to do that, you can sort of interrupt this whole process. You never even have to experience any emotion. Your physiology doesn't get fouled up. You don't have this drive to bring things back to balance. So you're not having to exert willpower. You're kind of nipping it in the bud. So I could go on forever and ever, talk about this stuff for hours, but I'll stop there. Again, the point that I want to make is that unwanted drinking is a response to emotional discomfort. And if you try to, here we go, unwanted drinking is a response to emotional discomfort. If you try to manage this all at an intellectual level, you're at a loss. If you'll kind of understand what's going on in your body, pay attention to that, process these raw signals with the smart part of your brain instead of sort of this more biologically driven part of your brain, this is where you can start to get some leverage over your drinking. All right, thanks for your attention and have a great day.